to today with a lot of humility, and the type of humility that comes about when you've been exposed to something that is very powerful. And if we go back 2 weeks ago on this day, Reverend Eileen Brownell was here to take us through a service that, the best way I can describe it was she was bringing us into a healing practice, a healing ceremony over what had happened in Chico at the library that we all know about. And it was amazing. And she pulled in the ministers and practitioners who were here to help her with this. And of course, the fact that we live in a tactile world, it had that tactile element. It had candles and light and words and sentiment. Because in this earthly journey, that's what we respond to. We are tactile beings. And something that she did, it was all beautiful. However, there was an aspect to it that at least it just spoke so deeply to me. I was so tender when I left here about the idea of practicing forgiveness and respect on a spiritual level for the gentleman who engaged in that activity that caused that harm, that unspeakable harm, and then raising up also that person's family. And I love that expression of the love of divinity, which we are all trying to embody. That's why we come to places like this. All around town today, there are churches and centers and whatever where people have come and they go in and they sing and they listen and they read things, and we all want to expand our spiritual influence in this world, in our own lives. And then last week, Reverend Kathy and Reverend Vicky did this wonderful service where they were inviting us into, and it was kind of like this workshop. It was what it was. It was so wonderful. And they were inviting us into this idea, what is the world asking me to bring forward in terms of what's going on right now in the world? And following up on the week before, I'm already tender, so I come in and they hit my heart space again. And so and they gave us a pen and a piece of paper, and, these are my notes that I took from the 6 questions. I've been carrying it all week like a talisman, in my back pocket. And so, I took these, and then we sat with 3 of us together. So I was with 2 other people, and we talked about this. And what came up with the 3 of us was just so beautiful, and how we tag teamed each other and we built on each other, and we filled in word spaces with each other. And what came up in the room is just that it was just, I felt like it was such a call to, it was such a call to reach for and aspire to that higher expression of self that draws us to spirituality, religion, whatever you want to call it. And, we kind of go along, oh yeah, I'd like to be enlightened, I might like to be the Buddha, I'm not really sure, But then it comes right down and just sits in our lap, and it's like something, suddenly we see the world around us and recognize that, yes, the world, including us, are looking to each other to bring change, healing, openness, expression forward. And we are looking to each other because we are humanity. And I hope I don't offend anyone by saying this. We are primates. That's what we are in this physical expression. We are spiritual beings, but we are primates. And if you study the primates, those other members of our primate family, and you look at their connection to community, it's awe-inspiring. Most of these primates are vegetarian, and a lot of them are pretty big, They say that a male African gorilla can run 500 pounds, and so he's got to keep up his health and his weight on a bunch of grass. He's a vegetarian, which means they have to forage nonstop. That's why they wander around together. And yet in that, there will be a number of hours a day where they will stop and they will groom each other. And in terms of in terms of my exposure to the primate thing, in terms of what I've read in the documentaries, that's not just pulling termites off each other, which is important. That is communication. That is connection. That is intimacy. That's an intimate expression. What are they looking for from each other? What are we looking for? Am I going to be okay? Are we going to be okay? And what came up for me last week was an image in my mind, and I want to say right off the bat that I'm going to be giving you an example that comes from a highly homogenized cultural place. And what I mean is I'm going to be talking about white men, okay? That's it. And I know that in our in our awareness of diversity today, this does not have the context of the 21st century. Because when I experienced this was probably around 1969, 70, 68, somewhere in there, in the world of PG&E, which when my dad was a PG&E employee was white men, period. That's all you saw, okay? So it was within that context. However, within that context, my father, who was not the most, my father was a stoic guy. He was kind of an engineering mind, mathematical mind. I think he was a genius. He didn't have a whole lot of education. I think that he could have been an engineer. He worked in the hydroelectric, which is, over there on Highway 70, all those power plants, all those hydroelectric plants going from Orville to Quincy. And he worked in that world. White men, all up in there. So that's the homogenized world I'm going to take us into for just a moment. But my dad opened my eyes to something that I didn't realize I had carried in my heart until last Sunday. Because one of the questions was in terms of what is the world asking us to bring forward, and I took that in my soul, and what came up for me was this picture of something, an experience I had with my dad. So my dad was a World War II guy, and so he came into PG&E with all those World War II guys afterwards looking for jobs and stuff. And then there was also a mixing of Korean War guys because they were right behind, And so that was the world, that white male world that had come out of those experiences and then found jobs in places like PG&E. My dad had a coworker named Chuck. And he was a little bit younger than my dad, so I think he was a Korean veteran. And he looked up to my dad a little bit because my dad had been around a few more years than him doing it, and Chuck was learning the ropes of what it was to operate a hydroelectric power plant, which was complicated. And Chuck also was a born-again Christian, like my dad. He and his wife, and he had one son. And his son was a little bit younger than I was because we take all this in. And so by that time, we had been living in the Feather River Canyon and we moved out. But Chuck and his wife lived in a camp up in the Feather River Canyon. I can't remember the name of the camp. I'm talking about, we called them camps. They were the places where the employee houses were. And there's a straightaway in Highway 70, somewhere after a place called Story, where you go up there and there's a bridge that goes over the river and there's housing over there. And that's where they lived. So this one night, my dad and mom, and they took me with them, wanted to go up because Chuck and his wife were having a barbecue at their house. And, living in the canyon can be kind of isolating. And they were attending the church, my parents were, so my dad worked with him in PG&E. He attended a church. And so anyway, so we're there. It was about the middle of summer, and when it starts getting dark in the Feather River Canyon, it can be really hot. The summer is nice because of that river. It kind of cools it down. It brings it down a little bit, right? And so we're at this little camp, and I had grown up in a camp prior to being 10 years old, and so to me, it was the houses were kind of cool, and I always liked that part of my life, so it was nice to be there. So Chuck and my dad kind of started taking a walk around this little community in the twilight, the evening. And so I went behind them, and all of a sudden, they're talking about stuff, cars and PG&E and whatever. And all of a sudden, they started talking about their fathers. My dad talked about my grandfather, and Chuck talked about his dad. And Chuck said, yeah, and he had grown up in New York City. And he said, yeah, my dad kind of got me off on the wrong foot in life, with that sawed-off shotgun behind the door all the time. And so a little kid is like, sawed-off shotgun. That was, to me, that was like Dillinger and criminal stuff, right? Bonnie and Clyde, sawed-off shotguns. And so he kind of talked, and my dad was really listening to him, and my dad was kind of talking about challenges he had with his own dad. And then what I realized in the conversation was Chuck, when he was really young, probably, maybe around 16 to 18, he got himself locked up for a while. And I don't know, going back to those days, I don't know if it was righteously prison or it was a long stint in jail or whatever. And so anyway, I'm just really listening. My dad was just really being present for that. And then, so my dad said something like, well, something to the effect of, how did your life kind of go in a different direction? Well, he got drafted into the service, and so he went in, and he went into Korea. And he got away from all that. And so then he does his time in the Army. He gets discharged in California and decides, I'm not going back there. And built his life in California. And that's all I kind of got out of that conversation, but I knew my dad was just really there, and I knew my dad really cared about him and really accepted him. So a few days went by, and I was with my dad alone, and I asked him about the details of Chuck a little bit. I said, "What?" I said, "Wow, he was talking about sawed-off shotgun, and his dad, and well, Chuck's dad didn't make a living in a very respectful way. Chuck's dad, he made his living in a criminal way. And, okay, but then he said, but Chuck is a good man. He said, Chuck walks with the Lord, which is code for he was saved, right? That's Christian code. And then he said, and he paid his debt to society. And Chuck is a good man. And in that moment, I realized that my dad had wherever he came from, was willing to lean into the other, was willing to lean in with compassion, lean into with presence. I never really seen my dad do that before. He had a hard time with that. And that really affected me. And this is where the homogeny comes in, where Chuck was completely accepted in that world, even with that background, and was obviously somewhat comfortable with sharing his background. So, as is with synchronicity, about a month or so ago, I got this book in our bookstore. This is Joseph Campbell, Thou Art That, which is a collection of stuff that Joseph Campbell never published. These were articles, talks he gave, notes, diary, collections that were harvested by 3 editors, all academics, all PhD types who harvested his material. And one of those, a gentleman by the name of Eugene Kennedy, a PhD, I believe he's at Loyola, I think. Yeah, I have it right here. He's a professor emeritus of Loyola. And he writes in the preface of the book, "Thou art that," which is the name of it, an epigram, which epigram means a paradoxical consideration, captures Campbell's generous spirit, just as it does his scholarly focus. He was fond of asking, how is it possible that suffering that is neither my own nor of my concern should immediately affect me as though it were my own, and with such force that it moves me to action, resulting in an instant response? Campbell delights in saying that the immediate reaction and response represents a breakthrough of a metaphysical realization best rendered as, "Thou art that." Thou art that. In other words, that part of our humanity, that primate us, that part of us that is in this physical world, it touches us. We may not be somebody who has traveled hundreds or thousands of miles to get to a border and cross, but when we see reflections of that on our screens, and we see those people, there's a part of us that says, "Thou art that." What Joseph Campbell's saying is, it's a metaphysical reaction to that. And so, given all this, I find myself on this exploration of, and this is what I shared with the two people I was with last week, is that what came up for me was compassion, right? We throw that word around a lot. Compassion. What's it mean, right? It means what my dad showed. Leaning in. I love you. I care about you. You're a good person. You're one of us. That's what the world is asking us to do. So then, like a good metaphysician, I looked at Ernest Holmes. And this is part of a quote, and later on, when I finish, I'll share the whole quote. Ernest Holmes says, "Mystics speak from the heights of spiritual perception, proclaiming the eternality of every individual life, the continuity of the authentic individual soul, and the unity of the universal spirit in all of life," and this is the kicker, "humble in one's own humanity." Humble in one's own humanity. That's where we are. We see the other in ourselves. And I was sharing with the two people I was working with last week, and how does the world want me to show up? What do they need from Andy? So I was sharing with them how my spiritual aspirations are to be compassionate, to be open, to believe in unity, to turn away from duality. And yet, and I'll be honest, I pull up behind a car and it's got a decal on the back, and suddenly, I ain't so compassionate. I ain't feeling the unity. I'm going deep into the separation, the conflict. We are being called to find that place where we can lean in fully and to love and to see ourselves within the other. And now New Thought Metaphysics, which is my spiritual home, I love New Thought Metaphysics, I believe in it, I relate to it, it always wants me to see the highest self. Someone asked me a question the other day, how do I show up with my clients well, first of all, I have a profession, but I'm also a metaphysician. And so I have a client in front of me who is a righteous, schizophrenic. Diagnosis, and there's the conversations and the laughter and all that. And so I was asked, how do you apply yourself psychologically but also spiritually to that? And I said, I accept it. What do you mean? I want to talk to them about their voices. I want to talk to them about what they're seeing. I want to get to know them. Because I want to use that to my advantage in working with them. Because not all those voices are bad voices. Some of those voices are giving them some good advice. And they very often can tell what voice is what. I want to know that. I want to enter that world. Because I work with substance abuse. How can I be of service to them to embrace a way of changing life if they're not even comfortable in their life they're living? I have to be able to lean in, and I have to be able to see them and experience them as best I can so that we can have that conversation. When we say God is all there is, does that mean God is in schizophrenia? Yeah, it does. Clinical depression? Yes, it does. It gives us another place to have a conversation. My dad and this guy bonded over the fact that his dad kept a sawed-off shotgun behind a door, which is something my dad never did. Never believed in, but they bonded over that. Because God is all there is. God is all there is. That's what all of this is about. This is why Ernest Holmes says, humble in our own humanity, to know that it fits with the whole thing. And somehow, all of that shadow, all of that struggle, all of whatever it is connected to our evolutionary, our evolutionary journey of consciousness. It's all there. Because in the field I work in, it's called co-occurring disorders. Co-occurring means they're running right side by side. Which means as a practitioner in that world, I have to be in both sides to have the conversation and to know that God is truly all there is. And so what I wrote down, really quickly when I got up here, because I can get scattered, is in the song that Dallas sang, open my eyes so I can know you. Open my eyes so I can know you. That's what the world wants of me. To look deeper than the decal on the back of a car. To be able to have a conversation. To be able to care fully for those that on the material level and the ego level I struggle with. Joseph Campbell says it's dialed into us. We just have to open up to it. We just have to take a breath and a beat and accept the fact that thou art this. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'll give you the entire Ernest Holmes quote. He says, personal illumination comes to all alike, proclaiming ourselves as the child of spirit, even unto the power of humility. Even unto the power of humility. Proud of one's divinity, humble before the greatness of the whole, Mystics speak of the highest of spiritual perception, proclaiming the eternality of every individual life, even the schizophrenic, the continuity of the authentic individual soul, and the unity of the universal spirit in all of life. Holmes doesn't make an exception. In all of life. Even the guy with the decal on his car. Humble in one's own humanity. Our humanity is part of the alchemy of this spiritual awakening. It's part of it. It's not separate from it. To embrace our humanity. That's what the primates are doing, pulling the stuff off of each other. And maybe they eat some of it as they do it. I've heard it's good. I don't know. But they're involved at that level. And in psychology, it's called being fully emotionally present. And what tears us apart? To be emotionally abandoning. That's what tears us apart. Because I can dismiss that decal. They don't matter to me. I can't do that. Because there are things in our world right now that are calling us into showing up in this. And that's what the last couple weeks has been here at this center, which I'm very proud of. And that's what Joseph Campbell is trying to tell us from the spirit world now, because that's where he is. But all right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay. So the good news is that Dallas, you want to come on back on up here? Thank you.